If my people, which are called by my name, shall humble themselves and pray, and seek my face, and turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven, and will forgive their sin, and will heal their land.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Hello, Christian Patriots, and welcome to Church and State, where we strive to plug you into the pew and plug you into politics. I'm your host, Caleb Collier. With me, as always, Pastor Gabe Blomgren.
Yes, it's an honor to be here with a true patriot who's been in the movement, a very strong man of God. What I love, he loves the Lord, and he's raised up a home in that way, which tragically he's going through a little bit right now, and he's living in a what it looks like in our feed. You're in a bunker of some sort, a metallic bunker. What is that?
It is a 1961 Airstream trailer, which is serving as my command headquarters for the past year while I've been rebuilding my house after a house fire out here on the ranch. So I'm camped out next to my house, which hopefully will be moved back into by the end of this month.
Oh, excellent. All right.
I like the stainless steel background.
It does look pretty good, yeah, for sure. All right, let me do a proper introduction here.
Absolutely.
For sure. So our guest today on Church and State is William F. Jasper. Now, he is the senior editor for the New American Magazine. He's got a bachelor's degree in child psychology and education, and he's really one of America's top investigators, and we're going to be able to prove that on today's show as well. Perhaps best known for the amount of work that he really did on the Oklahoma City bombing, which is actually the subject we're going to be talking about. Bill has also written 2 books, Global Tyranny and Step by Step, the United Nations Exposed. So, Bill, thank you so much for joining Church and State.
My pleasure, gentlemen.
All right, so April 19th, I believe, was the 25th anniversary of the Oklahoma City bombing. And I don't know about you, Gabe, but I remember the 90s, it had some weird stuff going on. You had Waco, you had Ruby Ridge, you've got the Oklahoma City bombing.
Even the Mogadishu outbreak, you had so many people die. The whole movie Black Hawk Down, that was all going on at the same time. Very interesting times.
Yeah, for sure. So
Timothy McVeigh and the Oklahoma bombing sticks out. It was probably at that time, I don't know about for you, William, it was on the level that morning, I would say, as the 9/11 event. It was just so tragic, the photos, everything, the impact. So, yeah, it's clear in my mind, being probably, I think, an 11th grader when it happened.
But what was interesting was the official story. And right off the bat, it stopped making sense.
Yeah.
And Bill Jasper here is really the one that exposed that. So, Bill, go ahead and take it away.
Well, gentlemen, it's a big story, and it's an important story. It's not just a historical note now on the 25th anniversary. We had planned to do not a special issue, but a special coverage for the 25th anniversary for last month. But with the COVID-19, and we did a special issue on it, we kind of got shelved. So we will be having a history article supplement in the magazine, in the print magazine, and online on this, because it is important for several reasons. Prior to 11, this was the big terror event in the United States. 169 people killed, close to 700 injured. But what really, and not to minimize that at all, because those were all tragic losses. And I met and interviewed and became friends with many of the survivors, as well as the family members of those who died during the very long time, several years that I was involved in writing about the Oklahoma City bombing. We published numerous stories, or probably 150 stories on this over that time. It was our biggest investigation ever, and we put to shame all of the major media. None of them put anyone on it like this. Here was this massive event, and there were a lot of things that weren't adding up about it, and nobody jumped into it like we did. And we wouldn't have normally been able to allow the kind of resource deployment with me almost full time on it, on and off over the course of several years, as well as all of the professional help that we obtained free, but a lot of it we had to pay for. We had forensic specialists, voice specialists, because we had all kinds of recordings we had to identify. We had photographic specialists. We had forensic crime scene labs that we had to pay. We had engineers that we hired, including military engineers, etc. So we we committed a great deal of time and resources to this, and so there were so many parts of the story, and I'll try to hit on some of the high points, and you'll probably have some questions to bring up. But one of the reasons why this is so important today is that we have just gone through 4 years of what we in the New American and now all across the country and much of the other alternative media and even some of the mainstream media have acknowledged has been a deep state effort to pull off a coup d'etat here in the United States to eject the uh, constitutionally elected president of the United States and to throw him out of office, to destroy him, and create a revolution in government here. And that did not just come about overnight. When we talk about the deep state, we're talking about folks, very powerful people, who have, over the course of actually a century, put themselves and their friends in positions of power so that there is a permanent ruling class in the United States. And in our lifetimes, President Donald Trump, with all of his imperfections, and from our viewpoint, he has gone in the wrong direction on several major issues. But nevertheless, it's my opinion that no one in our lifetimes has, certainly not in mine, and I've been involved in this for over 50 years now, has won the White House and started overturning all of the globalist New World Order designs to merge the United States and world government. And on all of these different levels, he is being opposed. And that actually, many of the same characters and institutions, deep state institutions, that are arrayed against him and against our constitutional processes, and I'm referring specifically to the FBI, the CIA, all of the intelligence agencies, one that most Americans look to for as our shield and our sword against foreign powers, were arrayed against the people themselves. How does that happen? Well, the heads of all these organizations are appointed by the president and with the consent of Congress. And over time, they've been able to stack many of these decks. And we saw this very strongly in Oklahoma City. We had the FBI, and we can go into that. Many of the same characters, Robert Mueller, many of the same people that are involved in the Russia collusion hoax, all of that, were involved in Oklahoma City. And so what we are seeing now in the culmination of this coup attempt really has roots back in Oklahoma City. And Bill Clinton and his attorney, Janet Reno, and his head of the FBI, Louis Freeh, were all involved in making sure that the Oklahoma City bombing was covered up as to who was actually involved in it. And they wanted to simply pin it on Timothy McVeigh, who they would portray as representing all of the angry Americans who were fed up with the Clinton revolution. And that's the way the media at that time, which was totally in the tank for Bill and Hillary, just like they were in 2016 for Hillary. That is what they tried to do. And so I'll just mention this, then we'll jump into it. One of the very few other journalists who got into this and really helped this along was Ambrose Evans Pritchard of the London Telegraph. He was their Washington, D.C. Editor at that time, their chief correspondent. And he called me while I was in Oklahoma City And he said, hey, I've been reading your stuff on Oklahoma City. Great stuff. And I said, well, I've been reading your stuff on the Vince Foster murder. You're doing great stuff there. Well, yeah, but yours is a much bigger story. And I said, well, I agree. This is huge. He said, would you mind if I jump in on it? And I said, no, I've been trying to get other media to get in on this. And I won't mention the names of some of the others. They're well known in the conservative community. Every one of them who I approached, and I said, hey, look, I'll give you the deal that you ever have gotten in your journalistic career. I have all the sources. People trust me. I said, they won't talk to any of the other media. I'm talking about survivors, witnesses, first responders, etc. I said, they won't talk to anybody else, but if I tell them that you're okay and you get a investigative reporter and get together with me, I'll walk them through all the evidence. I said, we have all the evidence. We have all the expert testimony and everything. And every single one of them, except for Ambrose Evans Pritchard, were afraid to do it. They said, we like what you're doing, but hey, that's too dangerous. Clinton is dangerous. He comes after people. So when Ambrose said, can I come in? I said, yeah. And so he says, well, could I interview so-and-so? And I said, sure. I said, I'll give them a call. I said, I'll give you their numbers. I'll give you a setup for them. And so he did a series of stories that ran in the Telegraph and then ran in a bunch of other conservative media. And one of the things that in his book that he wrote about Clinton, and he starts out with a chapter on being on Air Force One. And Bill Clinton is telling the press corps that's traveling with him on Air Force One, he said, the country was going against us with the congressional elections and with the mood of the country after Waco and after Ruby Ridge. And he said, and then Oklahoma City happened and everything changed. Yes, it did. All of the conservatives ran back into their foxholes and everybody said, no, we're not going to say anything. If we say anything, they'll accuse us of being collaborators with Timothy McVeigh. They'll accuse us of being anti-government conspirators. And so it was a very lonely journey for several years because behind the scenes, many people would pat you on the back and say, hey, that's great. But no, we can't get into that.
But you ended up being on the side of truth and what was right. And so you, above all of these other individuals who had let fear dictate their lives, you ended up coming out smelling like a rose. So as you were, sorry, go ahead, sir.
Such as it is, in the small world in which I have a little place to play, I did play a significant role, yes.
Absolutely. So let's get into this investigation because for the vast majority of Americans, they believe that Timothy McVeigh planted a truck with fertilizer as the explosive, and that this ended up taking out a whole portion of the Oklahoma City building there.
Massive amount. The
yeah,
whole
the
entire
Alfred P. Murrah
ripped.
building. Yes. But the reality is that doesn't hold up to all of the investigations that you were actually able to bring to light. So let's go ahead and get into that investigation.
Yes, and you can probably then bring up some of the photographic and graphic evidence that we have about this, because this was one of the things right off the bat. I got a call early on the morning of April 19th from my editor, Gary Benoit, and he said, Bill, television. I said, Gary, I don't even own a television. And he said, well, go online and see what you. So I did, and then I decided that, oops, sorry, got radio going in the background there. Walkie-talkies up here on the ranch. That's how we
communicate with each other. Absolutely.
So I said, but so I looked online and I saw what happened. I go, whoa. So I went over to my neighbor's house. We kind of lived back and forth there, his kids at my place. When I started watching what was going on there, and I said, oh, I got to get down there. So I hopped on a plane, went down there, was still down there while the smoke was going. And thus began a very big investigation, the biggest one that we had ever undertaken. And one of my first experts that I called on was Brigadier General Benton K. Parton. And he was probably the foremost explosives expert in the world. He's passed away a couple of years ago. But he was the commander of the Air Force Armaments Laboratory. And for decades, that's what he did, was blow up buildings. And if you're going to engage in warfare, you got to know, okay, if the enemy's in this bunker, if they're in this fortress, what are you going to use? Missiles. If you're going to use bombs, what kind of bombs? How much explosive and other characteristics do you need to handle them? Same kind of thing with building the bunker busting bombs that they used for Saddam Hussein in the Iraq War. So he had done all this, and he said right off the bat, he said, well, Bill, he said, because I had used him as an expert advisor before. He said, well, the news stories about the building being taken out with a truck bomb, an Anvil bomb outside of the building, he says that's ridiculous. He says that in a few hours, the forensic experts will be telling him no, that there were charges planted in the building. I said, well, why is that? He says, I said, well, that's a massive bomb. They said it's a big truck bomb. He says, that was an Anvil bomb. He says, yes, it's impressive to the layman. It makes a big boom. It makes a great big concussion out there. It will shatter windows and it will be heard for miles away. And that's what people are citing as evidence of how powerful this bomb is. But he said, if it had been driven down under the building so that the building's weight and structure had encased it, then there would be built up enough pressure there that it could have done some damage, but it wouldn't have created that very signal outline of destruction in the building. He says what you see there are a number of steel reinforced massive pillars that have been destroyed and taken out, and that's why those floors fell. He said that only happens when you have a direct hit or a charge that's planted on the structure. He says those structural members you cannot take down with air blast. And so that was a very, one of the most important clues that there was more to this than simply Timothy McVeigh driving up to the curb, which was 30 feet away from the building, with a Anfo truck bomb. This was important for a number of reasons, not just academic. If there were charges planted inside the building, there would be forensic evidence of that. Moreover, it would show that either Timothy McVeigh was some kind of Superman that could go inside and plant all these charges and go all the way up to Kansas, put this bomb together by himself, a couple tons, and drive it all the way down, and do it without being observed, etc. So it necessitated accomplices, co-conspirators. And early on, the Clinton administration, the person of Attorney General Janet Reno, came on and said that there, well, yes, she gave a John Doe number 1, which was a sketch that approximated Timothy McVeigh, and then another John Doe number 2, a mysterious individual, heavier, swarthier individual that was be on the lookout for. They had a bolo out for him all over the country. But then after a few hours, John Doe number 2 disappeared. And so a lot of our investigation focused on John Doe number 2. Was there a John Doe number 2? And if so, was this sketch anything approximating somebody who was working with Timothy McVeigh? And were there additional John Does? Because they said others unknown. So in the course of the investigation and the prosecution, of course, Terry Nichols, an Army buddy of McVeigh, was also indicted. He is in prison now. Timothy McVeigh was executed. Michael Fortier, another associate of his, was also prosecuted, but then he was dropped and given a light sentence for cooperating with federal prosecutors. Our investigation showed that there were multiple more accomplices. And so the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, was going to great lengths to make sure that all of these other accomplices went away. And one has to ask himself, why would they do this? And we then had to look at also the not just General Parton, but we had a whole host of military and civilian engineers and explosives experts that all agreed that this had to have been done with actual contact explosives. We had Dr. Sam Cohen, the father of the neutron bomb, a couple of other NASA scientists and engineers who just work on buildings and explosives. They all agreed. So those were two very important out of many different facets that we investigated. One, were there multiple bombs? Indeed, there were. The forensic evidence showed we were able to get a very good source who was one of the first people to go into the building. And Mr. Johnson was the owner of the elevator company that serviced the building. He went in there because he was one of the first ones there. He had to check to make sure that people weren't trapped in the elevators. He's also a professional photographer. He took literally a couple thousand photos inside of the building and all around the building. And we were one of the first ones to get access. So we had this huge table laid out with all of this. And what it showed was, yes, there was definite evidence of explosive marks on the pillars that remained standing there. And so this told the forensic experts that, hey, there's more here than just the truck. And so we were working with members of the public, with survivors and families of victims to stop the destruction of that evidence, because the Clinton administration moved very quickly within, I think it was 25 days after the bombing, to destroy the evidence. The crime scene. Normally what happens when you have a crime scene, you cordon it off, ribbon it off, so that experts can come in and examine it. Here you have the crime of the century up until 9/11. Nothing this big ever before. A lot of unknowns still involved in it. And they moved to bulldoze it and then take all of the pillars and all the structural members, the concrete and everything, and go bury it.
Sounds similar to what occurred during 9/11 or post 9/11.
And so General Parton was working with a number of different people to stop that and saying, hey, look, we should be able to examine this. Even after it was buried, he said, look, we can get a court order if somebody will do it, get a court order to have those structural members exhumed. He says they won't be able to destroy all of that evidence. He said, just as you see on CSI, they can do all kinds of investigations here. But the FBI lab wasn't interested in that. In fact, during the course of the investigation, we did a number of stories on, and we interviewed Dr. Frederick Whitehurst. Dr. Whitehurst was a whistleblower from within the FBI, not just any whistleblower. He was head of the forensic crime lab at the FBI. And he said that a number of things that were very devastating to the FBI, that they were fabricating evidence, destroying evidence, lying about evidence, suborning witnesses. So this is the FBI. And again, this is not to indict all of the good FBI or CIA or any, because what this shows is that the leadership is all important. If you have politically appointed leaders whose real mission is to subvert the agency and its stated mission, then that's where you really get into serious trouble. And so we failed to stop the destruction of that evidence. But funny thing, a lot of people went back and looked at the footage from that first day, and guess what? There were a bunch of news cameras there from locally, uh, uh, interviewing people as they're coming out of the building. And in some cases, here you have bomb squads bringing out unexploded explosives.
I
In fact,
remember that.
and so you'll see on there a number of times that people are told, get back, there's more explosives. And then you have these guys bringing them out. So how do you deal with that? Well, of course, the Clinton administration and local authorities came up with the idea, oh, well, that was a mistake. These were training objects that were part of the ATF's office. The ATF had a office there in the building, and these were training bombs. They were inert. Well, we go into a whole bunch of different things, but that brought up early on the ATF. ATF, alcohol, tobacco, firearms, the explosives people. They weren't in their offices that day. Why is that? And at first they said, oh, yes, we were in our offices. And after when the bomb went off, a bunch of us were in the elevator shaft and in the elevator, and that's why we didn't get killed. And then we finally pushed our way. The elevator fell, and then we open the doors, and we got out. Well, as I said, we talked with and we wrote about it. We interviewed the owner of the company. He was right there. He says, no, none of the elevators fell. All of that is a bogus story. He says that doesn't happen. That's a Hollywood thing.
Yep.
He said, and so then the ATF had to explain, well, how is it that you weren't at the office? And they came up with different stories. Well, we were at a golf tournament. You know.
So, Bill, I'm going to have to pause you right here, but what I would like to do is have you come back on and finish this story because there's a lot more to tell. So we'll continue this on the next episode. All right, Church and State is brought to you in part by Covenant Church and Mountain View Vital Medicine. Always remember the tree of liberty is most likely a birch. And with that, Church and State is out.
God bless.